its full power, we need not only your Master Crystal, but also the remaining 25 slave crystals from the surface. How do you expect to retrieve them when we don't have any Earthbound operatives left?
You fool! Do you think I'm unaware of the situation? If we don't have any friends left on the surface, then we need to find an enemy.
Hello everyone, Alec Elger the SideQuest Gamer here, and last month we took a look at Crash Bandicoot for the PlayStation, so it's only appropriate we take a look at its sequel. How was it? Let's roll the footage and check it out, shall we? Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back was developed by Naughty Dog and published by Sony. Development began in October of 1996, assuming that Universal was pleased with the initial sales of the first game. Development took approximately 13 months, and in that time, co-creator Andy Gavin actually created a new, more powerful engine called the Ghoul 2 or Game-Oriented Object Lisp 2. This engine, compared to the previous game's engine, was 3 times faster, twice the polygon count, and more importantly, 10 times the frames of animation. And when playing this game, it really does show that not 1 second of the 13-month development cycle was wasted. The creators poured their heart and soul into this project. The game begins with a cutscene of the series antagonist Dr. Neo Cortex falling at terminal velocity after the final battle in the first game, but he somehow survives the fall and lands in a dark cave discovering a power crystal. Not just any power crystal, it's the Master Crystal. 1 year later in Cortex's space station, his new assistant Dr. Engine informs Cortex that the Master Crystal would not be enough to power the laser on their space station, the Cortex Vortex. Yeah, remember the Cortex Vortex device that mutated Crash in the first place? Well, Cortex built a giant version of that in space. One blast from that machine and it can mutate and enslave the entire Earth's population. Engine mentions that 25 subordinate crystals are needed in order to power the station, but due to some undisclosed falling out with his previous assistant, Dr. Nitrous Brio, Cortex has no army to do the job for him, as all the enemies in the game are actually under Brio's control. So Cortex ominously has the idea to recruit their enemy Crash Bandicoot, and the next scene shows Crash and his sister Coco chilling out near their home until Coco asks Crash to get her a new laptop battery. He agrees, and on the way to his destination, he gets teleported to a warp room where a hologram of Cortex asks for his help to quote-unquote protect the Earth from a solar flux. And well, Crash, being the intellectually deficient marsupial he is, agrees and sets out to collect 25 crystals in hopes of protecting the Earth. Wow, Crash will do anything for anybody nowadays, yet the audience knows that something is up, because A, the game is called Cortex Strikes Back, not Cortex Saves the World. B, from the previous cutscene, we know that his intentions are anything but benevolent. And C, he always talks in that dark, conniving tone of voice like he's hiding something. Now, I can't remember if I mentioned this in my previous review, but every character in that game was voiced by Brendan O'Brien, but in the Crash 2, he only has the role of Nitrous Brio, Crash Bandicoot, and Engine. His Nitrous Brio has a very nasally voice, just like the previous game, but it does work for the character. His voice as Engine, however, kind of sounds to me like Soundwave from the 80s Transformers cartoon, mixed with a cliché, hunchback, mad scientist assistant with some European accents. And his Crash Bandicoot, well, it works just as it did in the previous game, as Crash only has like 1 or 2 words he says in the game, like, "Whoa!" But mostly his means of communication is through facial expressions. Dr. Neo Cortex is now voiced by Clancy Brown, whom I know as Captain Hadley from The Shawshank Redemption, but you guys probably know as Mr. Krabs from SpongeBob. And let me tell you, this is the only game where Cortex is actually kind of scary, almost like Sonic SatAM's Dr. Robotnik. Maybe it's the hologram's lighting, pixelation, and the purposely lower quality voice, but he's kind of intimidating in this game. Vicky Winters voices Coco Bandicoot in this game, and well, she fits the role alright. Her character is supposed to be like 11 years old, and she does sound a lot older than that age, but that's by no fault of the voice actress, as that's how the character's dialogue was written.
Perhaps it's to portray her as a hacking prodigy, perhaps I'm thinking too much into it, but she's an alright Coco Bandicoot, although I prefer Debbie Derryberry's performance in the later games, rather than Vicky Winters. I don't know why, maybe it's because I like Jimmy Neutron as the voice of Coco Bandicoot. Now you may ask, where's Crash's over-sexualized girlfriend Tawna? Well, apparently Sony of Japan did not like her due to alienating the family-friendly demographic it was trying to market to, so Naughty Dog decided to have a sister-type character to be alongside Crash as a counterbalance to Tawna. And you never see Tawna again until a spin-off game for the DS, which we don't talk about. And while Coco isn't exactly a complex character, she does serve as a source of story exposition in this game, as she's constantly investigating Cortex's claims, and even hacks into Cortex's holographic devices multiple times to contact Crash, so I will say she's a lot more interesting of a character than Tawna will ever be. But enough about the characters. The gameplay is a lot more three-dimensional. There's 25 crystals in each of the 25 main levels that Crash has to collect throughout the game. But rather than a traditional map to select a level, Crash Bandicoot 2 has warp rooms that serve as the hub world. There are 5 main warp rooms, each containing 5 levels. Get all 5 crystals in each warp room, and you'll unlock that warp room's boss. But this game gives you the freedom to choose which of the 5 levels you want to start out with. Don't want to go through Turtle Woods first? Come back to it later and choose Snow Go instead. While you will eventually have to play those levels and collect those levels' crystals and finish them, it's nice to be given that freedom nonetheless. The levels themselves are linear, with occasional open-ended pathways like optional alternate routes accessed by colored gems or the death route, only unlocked by not dying on the way there. This can be a challenge for some levels, but this game is definitely easier than the previous game. The levels are also, if this makes sense to you, more three-dimensional. I know I said this before, but the previous game had half the levels be entirely 3D side-scrolling sections and the other half being very linear corridor-like levels. But this time, only like maybe 20% of the game has three-dimensional side-scrolling sections like in the ice levels or all the bonus rooms.
Look, I have nothing against side-scrollers, as my favorite game of all time is a side-scroller, but I always like to see what Naughty Dog could do with the 3D capabilities of the PlayStation.
After you finish the 5 levels in each warp room, you unlock that warp room's boss level, which I have to say, the bosses in this game are an improvement over the first, but still nothing worth writing home about. Ripperoo, whom is now highly intelligent enough to chemically turn stone into TNT or nitro tiles with a pogo stick, and he's easier than before actually. The Komodo brothers and Engine are very entertaining and creative boss battles, with Engine being my favorite because you get to shoot Wumpa Fruit into his mech suit and take it apart, and the Komodo brothers have you hit one of the brothers into the other. Tiny the Tasmanian Tiger used to give me a really hard time, but just don't stand on the blinking platforms and jump diagonally when you need to and you'll be fine. But the final boss, is probably the weakest part of the game. Master the jetpack, hit him 3 times and you beat the game. He doesn't attack, you just have to avoid asteroids. The bosses are pretty memorable but very easy to be honest.
Luckily, if you're traveling from one warp room to another, you don't have to replay a boss battle again. Although if you do want to replay the boss battles, all you have to do is go up in the elevator while holding the triangle button. The game doesn't tell you this, which I found odd, but just remember that if you do want to replay the boss battles.
One aspect in this game that is a welcome addition to the series is the method of acquiring gems. In the last game, you had to break all the boxes in each level and not die. Well, technically you can die as long as you didn't hit the checkpoint box, but after hitting that checkpoint box to add to the box total, it's either do the perfect run or exit the level, loading screen, enter the level again, loading screen, and try again. And that could be very tedious, especially on the broken bridge levels. I can only be bothered to complete Crash 1 twice, and the ending, while funny, wasn't so funny I had to do it all over again, and the completionist ending being uploaded on YouTube and all, I definitely won't be completing Crash 1 again. Crash 2 lets you die as many times as you want, as long as you don't get a game over and have to play that level all over again, but you still have to break all the boxes. Some are hidden in death routes, many are hidden in bonus rooms, some are hidden in gem routes, but only like 3 out of 5 gem routes actually have boxes that need to be broken by Crash, as those are usually filled with nitro boxes as obstacles, and those can be blown up elsewhere. And the gem routes are usually meant just as a challenge to get the other silver gem hidden in that level, as there's two types of gems, some you find and others you get by completing the level or a specific challenge. But some boxes are hidden in very secret areas that you wouldn't think twice about. Like for example, there's a warp on the ice floe in Bear Down that unlocks a secret entrance to Air Crash which contains boxes. You couldn't access it any other way. I really like this method of progression as it rewards the curious players. However, it may annoy some people, and I do recommend getting a guide for finding some of these areas. It took me forever to find that a tile on Air Crash would warp me to the secret entrance in Snow Go that houses the otherwise unreachable red gem. If you get one gem, you're contacted by Nitrous Brio, who finds out you're working for his sworn enemy Cortex, and then states he will do all in his power to stop you from collecting the power crystals. He does mention that he wants you to collect 42 gems that could power his laser to destroy Cortex forever, so I agreed. The mandatory power crystals are very easy to collect as they're right there in plain sight, but finding the all 42 gems is a different story, as like 70% of the gems are acquired through breaking boxes. The other 30% have different challenges. Like in 2 of the water levels, you have to speed run them in under a minute or the gem will disappear and you'll have to try again, usually by a suicide, so you start at the beginning of the level, assuming you didn't hit the checkpoint boxes. Other gems require you to be explorative, like in the Eel Deal level, there's a vault blocked by the lethal nitro boxes that you can jump through, and behind is a green gem. How the heck was I supposed to figure that out? At least the entrance to the purple gem in Behaving had nitro boxes that didn't move and formed a staircase, so of course I had to explore that. Sometimes this game can be very cryptic at points. While I figured everything out many years before, those who never played this game before will have their work cut out for them should they try to beat this game 100%. Heck, I didn't even remember where the green gem was until I watched a Let's Player named Ratchet5 do a speedrun of this game against another Let's Player. I've heard many reviewers criticize the backtracking, and I agree. While it's not a major issue in this game, I do think that levels like the pits and digging it are especially annoying, as they would require you to enter one route in a fork in the road, and then backtrack in the other side of the fork after you get out of the first route. I hate when they do this, especially in digging it. Cold Hard Crash had backtracking, but it wasn't too bad because the camera was at least reasonable in the death route section. And don't get me started on piston it away. You have to get all the boxes at the end of the main level, but not die because you want the death route in the middle of the level to stay open. So after getting the last box, you backtrack to the left, avoiding obnoxious shrink rays and those mechanical enemies, and taking the death route to a pathway that has a few boxes, mostly nitro boxes. Why? Because the death route houses a checkpoint box and the switch that destroys all the nitro boxes in the level, which do count for your box total. Backtracking was a hassle in those few levels, but it's only for a few levels in this game. If that's the only criticism I can give to this game, it must be an otherwise fun experience. It's definitely easier than the first, and it's very generous with extra lives, and I mean very generous. Introduced in this game is the save system. No more passwords, no more stupid you only save at a certain point in the game. No, you can save whenever you want just by accessing the saves option in the wall in each warp room. Every warp room has a save station, and it is such a welcome addition to this game. I can't tell you how annoyed I was with the save system in the first game. That's one reason why Crash 2 is easier. The other could be attributed to Crash controlling better. In the first game, I often found myself overshooting jumps and falling to my death, but Crash controls more smoothly and feels less heavy than the first game, allowing my jumps to be more precise. They do introduce the slide ability, which takes some practice, but they do give you more airtime. It's very responsive when I need to take out an enemy that can only be taken out with a slide ability, or an electric fence with an opening at the bottom that can only be accessed through the slide ability. Also, the Greatest Hits version introduces the analog control, meaning you can control Crash with a joystick. But I still never used it as I didn't feel it was precise enough and kind of loose, most noticeably when jumping from one box to another over a bottomless pit. Stick with the D-pad in this game, and I believe the PlayStation Network re-release forces you to use the D-pad anyways. And the level design, despite having more dangerous stage hazards like the introduced nitro boxes and that explode when touched, feels more fair and rarely feels cheap. Some of my favorite levels are the Polar levels, where you ride Polar the bear throughout that entire on rails level. Don't worry, Polar will forgive you for those moments of torment later in his life.
Let's start handing out the presents.
I also like the jetpack and stream levels, as while they do have level gimmicks, they're fun gimmicks that break up the monotony of just running and spinning from beginning to end. Even the ice levels, despite the ice physics not being to my liking, are not bad when you get used to how Crash would control on the ice. The game is forgiving to those of less skill. If you die like several times in an area, the game turns a mystery box into a checkpoint in a nearby location. And if the level is too hard, you will spawn with an Aku Aku mask, giving you 2 hit points instead of 1. I only spawn those when doing the stream level speedrunning gems, and often carelessly hitting obstacles to my death. Or when playing those ruins levels, as a gorilla who throws those logs sometimes threw me off when timing when to jump over the logs. So this game is structurally sound, but as for graphics, I love the aesthetics in this game. The level geometry and textures are so much more detailed than the last game, and the color contrast used really makes the levels more atmospheric. The atmosphere is assisted by the wonderful soundtrack, which I will have to say is my favorite in the Crash Bandicoot trilogy. The water stream level sports a surfing beach theme, the sewer levels have a metallic sounding theme, with the first few verses sounding like water droplets impacting the metallic ground in a rhythm. The anti-gravity jetpack levels have an outer space theme, the boulder bear chase levels have an intense hard rock theme to convey the intensity of death chasing you in an obstacle course. The music is just well composed in general. The soundtrack doesn't try to go for instrumental cliches like a church organ for snow levels, which is great since 60% of the levels are snow themed to a degree, and when it does, the soundtrack still does stand out as it's fast paced and often intense, even in the jetpack levels. Josh Mansell composed the soundtrack of this game, and I applaud him for his work. While the soundtrack is not exactly Donkey Kong Country 2 quality, it doesn't need to be, and when I think of good PlayStation soundtracks, I either think of Josh Mansell's Crash Bandicoot 2 or Michiru Yamane's Castlevania Symphony of the Night. But overall, Crash Bandicoot just may be my favorite game in the series. While the general consensus is that Crash 3 is the best, I would agree if it weren't for a few things in that game that kind of bothered me. I'll get to that at some point. Crash Bandicoot 2 isn't exactly perfect. No game is, really. My friend Exo Paradigm Gamer pointed out that in terms of style, premise, and presentation, the Crash games do borrow many ideas from Donkey Kong Country. The first game takes place on a tropical island. There's jungle levels, factory levels, ruins levels, tropical levels, etc, etc. Castle Cortex is similar to K. Rool's Keep in Donkey Kong Country 2. Instead of barrels, there are crates. Spinning bananas where 100 will earn an extra life are copied with spinning Wumpa fruit where 100 will give you an extra life. Tawna is a lot like Candy Kong, where they're over-sexualized girlfriends that aren't even seen in the 2 sequels. Coco Bandicoot is a lot like Dixie Kong, where they're independent, strong female characters and both playable characters at one point, with Coco being playable in Crash 3 and 4, even both sharing banana-colored ponytails of all things. But Exo Paradigm Gamer wasn't criticizing the game for that, as he loves the Donkey Kong Country games, and something like Donkey Kong Country in 2.5D would appeal to him. As for me, I do agree with him to a degree, but platformers have always shared ideas, as Super Mario World had spinning coins that, when totaled to 100, would gain an extra life. And that came out 3 years before Donkey Kong Country. Super Mario Bros. 3 had ice levels, lava levels, and tropical levels, which both Donkey Kong Country and Crash Bandicoot are guilty of recycling. Heck, both games have rideable animals in several levels. Yoshi, anybody? Although Crash is restricted to an on-rail segment for those particular levels, rather than as a free roam gimmick, although Dino from Crash 3, I believe that's his name, despite appearing in 2 levels, does have this free roam ability. Is Crash Bandicoot original? No. But everything is borrowed. And as a game, it was a blast to play and a blast to finish, literally, as the secret ending for getting all 42 gems and defeating the final boss has Brio keep good on his laser cannon promise.
So overall, I would give Crash Bandicoot 2 a 94 out of 100. It is an excellent platformer that you must try out, and for the low price of admission on the PlayStation Network, I recommend downloading it. Thank you guys so much for watching this Crash Bandicoot 2 review. It is one of my favorite games of all time. Even if it's not perfect, it's still one of my personal favorites. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and remember to stay awesome!
Here's the case. Whoa, jeez. Naughty Dog really wanted to introduce you to this new character.